Oh, hello there. You're watching Dansky, the place to be to develop your creative skills. In this tutorial, I don't know why I'm talking like this. In this tutorial, we're going to learn how to create a hexagon logo all in Illustrator. Let's go. Rightio, so we're now in Illustrator, and as always I've got an artboard that is 1000 pixels wide and 1000 pixels high. And the first thing I'm going to do is left click and hold where the rectangle or the ellipse tool is, and go down to polygon tool, and we're going to create a hexagon. That's a 6-sided shape, and we can just left click anywhere on the artboard and it brings up this dialog box, and we can just type a radius of 50. It doesn't really matter because we're going to adjust the size anyway. The important number is the number of sides that is set to 6, and click OK. And then of course we can scale this up from the corner holding shift and left clicking. And if we just select the stroke over here and set that to none, and then select the fill, and we'll just make this black for now. And you can do that from the swatches panel. Just pick any color, it doesn't matter, because we're going to be changing them anyway. And then next we can hover over one of the corners until you see the rotate icon here, and then just left click and drag. And of course this allows you to freely rotate the shape, but we're going to hold shift so it snaps to a 90-degree rotation, essentially so you've got these points pointing up and then this point pointing down. And in fact I'm going to scale this up even more, and you can scale towards the center by holding shift when you drag, and holding Alt as well. So you hold those two keys on the keyboard and it will scale up or down towards the center. So this is going to be the maximum size of the logo we're creating. And we actually need to create another hexagon. So let's just select this one, go to Edit, Copy, Edit, Paste in Place. And I'm going to match the background color, so we'll just pick white from the swatches panel. And again, we're going to scale down towards the center by holding Alt and Shift on the keyboard and then left clicking. Now, depending on the size that you set this white hexagon to is going to determine the thickness of your logo. So we could make this thicker by making it smaller, or we could make it really, really thin. It depends what you're going for. I think I'm going to go for something like this, maybe just a pinch smaller. Now at the moment, these are two colored shapes. We have a black shape and a white shape. And if I just quickly throw a color behind, you can see that this is how it looks. Now what we need to do is we need to knock out this white shape from the black shape behind. And we can do this very easily using the Pathfinder panel. So if we left click on the black shape, hold shift and left click on the white shape, so they are now both selected, we can go to Window and down to Pathfinder, and you can see I've got my Pathfinder panel docked in my workspace on the right here. And the option we want is this one here. So it's called minus front, but you can also think of this as subtract, and it will subtract the shape on top from the shape underneath. So in this case, it will knock out that white shape from the black shape. And there we go. So we now have a hole in the middle of our hexagon, which is exactly what we want. And we can just select this temporary background and hit delete or backspace to remove that. So the next thing we're going to do is actually go to view. And before we go any further, just make sure that we have smart guides turned on, snap to point turned on, and snap to pixel turned off. And I'm actually going to go and create some colors. Let's do this in the middle. So just grab any of the shape tools. We'll use the rectangle tool for now. And I'm just going to create a bunch of squares, and you can hold Alt and Shift and drag across to create copies. Now the reason I'm doing this is I like to define my colors up front as global swatches, because then it makes it a lot easier to create the gradients that we'll do in a moment, but then global swatches can be edited easily anyway. So I'm going to go for, I think I'm going to go for something like a yellowy, orangey, reddy gradient. So I need 4 colors. So I'm going to start with the lightest one, which is going to be this. So like a really light yellow. Make sure you've got the shape selected before you do that. So we'll go with a yellow. And we'll select the next one. And just you can see I'm dragging the hue slider here as well. So we're just gradually going from a light yellow through into a lighter orange. And then we're just going into a slightly richer, more vibrant orange that's also a bit darker. And then right on the end, we're going to go for a darker, more reddish orange. So you can see I've graduated from one color through to another, but you know, these are going to be easy to edit with global swatches at the end of the video, and this might look terrible. I've got no idea, but we'll find out and we can easily change it if it does. So next, open up your swatches panel and just select each of these colors and just click new swatch. The important thing here is to just make sure global is checked. And you can see it adds the swatch to the swatch panel with a little white tag in the corner, just indicating that it is in fact a global swatch. So I'm just selecting all of these and clicking the new swatch icon. And there we go, we have our 4 colors added. In fact, we can actually select all of these other colors and hold shift and just go ahead and delete these because we're not going to need them. Okay, it's randomly replaced it with that, but that's fine. We can just pick the correct color there. Cool, so we've got our 4 swatches and I can delete these now. I don't need those anymore because we have the swatches created. So the next thing that we're going to do is actually grab the pen tool and we're going to divide this hexagon shape that we've created up into segments. So we'll start up here and just left click. And you can see we have those smart guides and that snap to point. Really does help make this so much easier. And we've just created one shape really easily. And next, go to select, deselect. I definitely recommend learning this shortcut here as well. And then we can do exactly the same here. And then deselect. So after I draw every shape, I'm going to use the shortcut key so I don't have to keep going to this menu. And I'm doing this all in one color at the moment. It doesn't matter what color you use, just as long as everything snaps in place. So when you have smart guides and snap to point switched on, it really does just become a dot to dot. Which is great if you enjoy dot to dots. And there you go, it can go a little bit wrong. So just make sure you hit that deselect to deselect the current selection first. Otherwise it might try and continue that path, or it might join one shape to another where you don't want it to. And well, then it can get all kinds of crazy. So just remember to draw your shape, select, deselect. And if for whatever reason that isn't working, you can also select shapes and go to Object and Lock Selection. So you can lock certain shapes so you can't select them or move them or edit them in any way, but Illustrator will still snap to them using those smart guides. So that's another way around it if you do have any trouble in this section. Right, so we've got all of these different segments selected. And we could go through and manually select all of these holding shift, or we can just grab the magic wand tool and just click and it will select everything of that color. And we can go to edit, cut. What that does is delete the selected object, but it also copies it to the clipboard. So now we can just select the black shape behind. We don't need this anymore. Hit delete or backspace and then go paste in place. And it will paste back in the orange shape that we copied to the clipboard. Now at the moment you can see it's just an orange shape. If we go into outline mode, which is Command or Control Y, we can actually see all of the segments that make this up. And what we're going to do now is, well, this is the fun bit because we actually start to get applying gradients to our shape. So let's just select this segment here for now. And we'll open up the gradient panel on the right. If you don't see that, just go to Window and down to Gradient. In fact, if you don't see any of these panels over here, you can find them under the Window menu and you can drag them and rearrange them as you like to fully customize your workspace. So we'll just click on the gradient slider and of course we get that default black to white gradient, but we can now double click on these black and white swatches on the gradient slider, and it will bring up our swatches panel. And of course, we've got our 4 colors that we created here. So we'll start with our lightest color first, and then we'll double click on the black and change this to the second one along. And then what we're going to do is select this shape here, this segment next to it, and click on the gradient slider, and it uses the same gradient. But now what we're going to do is we're going to use the other 2 colors. So we've got one there, double click on the swatch and add this one here. So now we can see our gradient in action, but what we're also going to do is left click on all of these inner segments and then select the eyedropper tool. Now when we click on the gradient that we've created here, this is the darker of the 2 gradients, it will apply this to all of the selected shapes. And we can do the same for the outside. So we can go around holding Shift and selecting all of those outside shapes, select the eyedropper tool, and then click on the first gradient we created. And there we go, it's applied it to all of them. Now at the moment there is quite a difference between the yellow and the orange, so I want to bring these a bit more in line. But the great thing is we don't have to edit the swatches and then reapply those gradients. We can simply go into the swatch, make sure the preview box is checked, and I can start adjusting this, and you can see in real time it shows me any changes to that color. So let's adjust that. I'm going to double click the next one along. Maybe make this a bit darker here. And then of course, this can have a knock-on effect. If you start adjusting colors and making them darker, you may need to go and then make the next color along a bit darker. But because these are all set up as global swatches, every time you update a swatch, it updates every instance of that color in your document, which is a massive, massive time saver. And then we can go back to the first one, maybe make this a little bit more vibrant, a bit brighter, bring a bit more yellow back in. So this section can have a lot of back and forth in it, and it's definitely worth taking the time to experiment. So I think we'll go for something like this. I could spend hours doing this. I'll try not to, because I think it would probably get very boring, but let's go for something like this. Okay, so we've made a pretty significant improvement, and we've brought all of these colors just that little bit closer together. So now what we're going to do is adjust some of the gradients. So we can click on all of these individual segments because we created them individually with the pen tool, and we can actually adjust the angle. So I could change that one to 45 or 60 and just rotate that around. I can click on this one here. You can even adjust the position of the gradient as well, so you can have one color being more dominating over another if you want. Depends entirely what you're going for. So we can adjust the angle. You can go into negative value if you want. So all of these gradients can be fully adjusted. I'm just going to try and do this nice and quickly. And you can reverse the gradient as well. So just by clicking on this icon here, you can quickly and easily swap the gradient around. And you can again use the eyedropper tool if you'd like to match the same angle from another gradient. So I think we'll just switch this one around here. I'll try not to spend too long on this. But of course you can spend a lot longer on yours. So there we go, we have a little bit of a variety in the gradients. We've sort of mixed them up a little bit, and we can do the same thing with these ones as well. In fact, I'm actually going to make that last color significantly darker. just so it looks like we're adding a few more shadows into our logo. Okay, something like this. Just helps create a bit more depth going from that darker color to the lighter color. And then what we can do is click on all of these individual segments and adjust that rotation. And you can also use the gradient tool as well. So you can use this to adjust the gradient if you like. But for me personally, I'm a numbers person. I like to add in the angles here. I'm a bit weird like that. But it depends on your preference. So that's looking good. Maybe flip that one around. Remember, you've got the reverse gradient option there. No, that's a terrible idea. Let's just move that around here. So please, you don't necessarily need to follow exactly what I'm doing here. This is just showing how you can use these various tools to just get a bit more creative with what you're doing. And I'm sure your colors, your shapes, whatever you're creating here will look slightly different to mine, and that's just awesome. Cool. Okay, so we've got our shape. It's looking pretty good. What we're going to do next is we're going to add a little bit of a highlight around all the edges. So if I just zoom in, we could leave it like this. What I'm going to do is grab that pen tool and just make sure that nothing is selected. And then just start doing again another dot to dot. And I'm going to do something like this. So I've just done this very manually, freehand, and I'm going to select that shape and then just click white. In fact, we can double click white and also make that a global swatch. And from the transparency panel on the right, we can change the blending mode to overlay. And if you don't see the transparency panel, again, just go to window and down to transparency. And we could even try soft light, a little bit more subtle, and we could drop that opacity down to 50%. Now you can see I created this manually. We've got a lot of inconsistency here. This width here is very inconsistent to this, but we can use the direct selection tool just to drag this into position. So each of these is consistent in their width. And in fact, as we move this anchor point around, we have a lot of control over how thick this is or how thin this is. As long as we keep that width consistent on both sides, that's the important thing. So you can see as I zoom out, it just highlights that edge a little more, and we could even bring that back up to 100. And then maybe make that a touch thicker. So something like that. And we can go ahead and of course do that on the other edges. So we'll do this one over here. Like this. So again, just a good old dot to dot. And we can just use the eyedropper tool, and it samples the same properties from the one that we already did. Now, of course, you can see the size here, wildly different, but again, direct selection tool, we can just bring that in, zoom out. There we go, a lot more consistent. But let's be a perfectionist. Just zoom in a tiny bit more. There we go. Perfect. It's got to be perfect. Now, we could go ahead and do this for the other side, but this is quite a manual step in the process. So actually, for maximum accuracy, I'm going to select both of these shapes here by holding Shift. I'm going to edit, copy, edit, paste in place. And then I'm going to go to Object, Transform, and reflect this along the vertical axes and click OK. And then just hold Shift and drag these over, and you can see those smart guides snaps it in place perfectly. Now, because these highlights, these edges are all white and they just use a soft light blending mode, if I start changing the colors, the gradients and all that stuff, they will still blend beautifully just because they're using white. So it just adds a highlight to all of those edges. And there we go. That's how to create a hexagon logo in Illustrator. As always, guys, please feel free to leave any questions or comments down below. A huge thank you to the people who support me on Patreon. Thank you so much. If you'd like to find out more information or become a patron, there is a link in the description. But as always, like this video if you enjoyed it, take care, and I'll see you next time.